morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR and welcome back to another video. If you've been on my channel for any amount of time, you're probably familiar with my series of videos where I broke down who the strongest legendary Pokemon were, canonically speaking. But surprisingly, we've never actually dived into who the strongest legendary Pokemon is in the actual games. So join me as we once again take competitive Pokemon far too seriously to break down all the stats and find out who is the greatest legendary Pokemon of all time. But before that, let's hear from the sponsor of today's video, Dave. Finances are intimidating, but since I started using Dave, it's made managing my money so much easier. Which is important because I blow way more money than I should on Pokemon cards. I'm a firm believer that everybody should have a budget that they stick to, and Dave helps you do just that. Dave is a banking app that's leveling the financial playing field. When you download Dave, you could get up to $500 in 5 minutes or less. No credit checks, no late fees, no interest. It's part of Dave's Extra Cash account. Extra Cash gives you more money to buy groceries, fill the tank, pay the rent, and maybe buy some Pokemon cards, all without having to wait for your next paycheck. Advance the money you need with no interest and then settle up later. Download Dave today at dave.com/JPR, that's dave.com/JPR, or download the Dave app. No credit check, no late fees. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Eligibility criteria and instant transfer fees apply. Banking services provided by Evolve. Member FDIC. Thank you, Dave, for sponsoring today's video and helping people with their finances. Let's get back to it. Now, as always, remember that Mythicals are a subcategory of legendary Pokemon and are usually banned from any online competitions or VGC events. Why? Because Pokemon! So unfortunately we cannot take Pokemon like Mew, Deoxys, or Arceus in consideration for this video, just because data on them is rather scarce. So the first thing we need to do is narrow our pool of contestants. As of making this video, there are 66 legendary Pokemon, excluding Mythicals and Ultra Beasts. And quite frankly, I don't really want to have to sit here all day and break down the competitive viability of all 66 of them, so for phase 1, let's determine who the strongest ones from each region are. Luckily, Kanto is a very easy one, as Mewtwo easily stands over the birds with 680 base stat total, a number that would serve as the stat ceiling for many generations to come. And with its 2 Mega Evolutions increasing that number to 780, it's no competition. In Johto, Ho-Oh and Lugia are each tied with a base stat total of 680 and are the only two from this generation who qualify for Ubers in the singles meta. But generally speaking, in both the singles meta and VGC, Ho-Oh has almost always outperformed Lugia in terms of usage, so we'll use it as Johto's rep. Now, Hoenn is a bit tricky because depending on whether or not you include the existence of Megas and Primals, the answer changes drastically. The answer also changes depending on the format, as in VGC, Primal Groudon and Primal Kyogre were actually far more common at their peaks than Mega Rayquaza was. But in singles, Mega Rayquaza literally had to be banned to its own tier because it was too much even for regular Ubers to take on. He was Anakin Skywalker, and the other legendaries were the younglings ready for slaughter. Groudon and Kyogre offer more assistance to their teams thanks to their weather setting abilities, but in a vacuum, Rayquaza is more powerful. So to keep things simple, I think we'll take Rayquaza for this one. Plus, hey, we're going back to Kalos soon, so why not include Megas? Since Arceus is excluded from this contest, Sinnoh is actually a harder pick than you may think. Giratina is actually surprisingly bad in most competitive contexts, so like in Gen 2, the answer comes down to one of the two mascots, Dialga and Palkia. In singles, neither of them see much action these days, and in VGC, Palkia was slightly preferred to Dialga during their peaks in 2022. So I'm tempted to use Palkia for this one, but I doubt it'll really matter because despite being two of the most powerful legendaries canonically speaking, they really don't compare to the best that most other generations have to offer. Gen 5 is another strange case because the title of strongest legendary belongs to none of the mascots. Zekrom, Reshiram, Kyurem, and even both of its fusion forms are surprisingly uncommon picks on both sides of the meta. Not so surprisingly, the title definitely falls to one of the three genies, Tornadus, Thundurus, or Landorus. I know Landorus has had a bit of a slip in Gen 9 compared to the other two, but taking lifetime stats, their peaks, and singles into account, Landorus is certainly the best, so he's our pick for this gen. As mentioned in the worst legendary Pokemon video though, Gen 6 might be the hardest one of them all. Despite there being a record low 3 legendary Pokemon from this gen, all 3 of them are remarkably close in how good they are. We already crowned Zygarde the worst of the 3 in the worst legendaries video, so with Xerneas and Yveltal, it comes down to consistency versus peaks. Xerneas certainly had a higher peak than Yveltal, as Power Herb GMNC all but killed VGC for a few years, but more recently Yveltal has held up as the more popular of the two. But so far we've used peaks as a tiebreaker, so Xerneas it is. Gen 7 is thankfully an easy one, as Necrozma settles any debate we would need to have between Solgaleo and Lunala. I mean, I guess that means there is a debate between Dawnwings and Duskmane for which is better, but realistically, it's just gonna become Ultra Necrozma anyway, so who cares? Gen 8 is just Zacian. Do I really need to go into further detail? Like, yeah, Urshifu might be worse right now since it's illegal, but Zacian may have had one of the single greatest runs of all time, so it's easily the pick here. And in Gen 9, this one is also tricky since Koraidon, Miraidon, and Terrapagos haven't been legalized in doubles yet, and they already have plenty of competition from the likes of Qianpao and Chi Yu, but it's hard to ignore just how good Koraidon is in singles right now. It's absolutely dominating Ubers with nearly 70% usage, and having a sunsetting ability all but guarantees that it'll wreak havoc in VGC whenever it's legalized, especially with it having access to Paradox teammates. You may be surprised to hear me gloss over Terrapagos so quickly, but I can sorta see the future, and yeah, that stellar form is definitely not surviving past 2026. You can take that to the bank. And another thing that you can take to the bank with you is that subscribing to this channel will increase your Pokemon knowledge tenfold, so be sure to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. It's free. So we have our Elite 9 to pit against each other. Mewtwo, Ho-Oh, Rayquaza, Palkia, Landorus, Xerneas, Necrozma, Zacian, and Koraidon. Right off the bat, I'm sorry to say it, but we'll have to eliminate Ho-Oh, Palkia, and Necrozma. Don't get me wrong, these Pokemon are still plenty strong, but they never truly dominated an era of competitive Pokemon like all the rest of these contestants have. These other 6 are titans that suppress entire eras of competition, while these 3 are just the best that their gens have to offer. Necrozma may have had an argument in Gen 7, but Ultra Necrozma effectively had the lifespan of a butterfly, and neither Dawnwings or Duskmane have been relevant in VGC since. Also, the 2 years that Ultra Necrozma was around for, it didn't even win Worlds. Tapu Koko and Primal Groudon did. How are you gonna be the GOAT with no rings? On that note, since we use their peaks to determine who made it this far, for this next section, consistency over a long period of time is paramount. You're among the best of the best now, so what separates the GOAT from the rest is the ability to stay there for the longest period of time. Beginning with Mewtwo, I have no doubt that Gen 1 Mewtwo may be the single most destructive Pokemon of its time. But JPR, I hear some of you saying, Mewtwo never got sent to Anything Goes like Mega Rayquaza did in Gen 6. Yeah, but also consider that in Gen 1, Mew and Mewtwo were literally the only 2 Pokemon in Uber, so that tier basically was Anything Goes back in the day. If peaks were all that we were considering, then yeah, Gen 1 Mewtwo is undoubtedly the best. Thanks to how the special stat was calculated, Mewtwo bolstered unfathomable amounts of bulk and power at the same time, while also having access to Amnesia, which boosted both of its stats simultaneously. And it had Recover, which made this Pokemon nearly unkillable after setting up. The only way to topple a Mewtwo in Gen 1 is simply to have a Mewtwo of your own. But as time has progressed and power creep has been trending upward, Mewtwo is now the Pokemon equivalent of that guy who peaked in high school, now only having a mere 1% usage rate in Gen 9 Ubers. And surprisingly, even when Megas existed, Mewtwo was never that popular of a VGC pick as it lacked the synergy the Pokemon like Kyogre or Groudon offered to a team. Psychic has also degraded significantly over time, now often being regarded as one of the worst types both offensively and defensively speaking. Next on our list is the other titan of Mega Evolution, which of course is Mega Rayquaza. Honestly, I may as well only discuss the Mega in this section because, as I mentioned earlier, Vanilla Rayquaza is surprisingly underwhelming compared to most modern legendaries. Even when compared to Groudon and Kyogre, it has far fewer World Championship wins. And ultimately, that may be what does Rayquaza in for this competition. Yes, Mega Rayquaza is the closest thing we've had to a modern-day equivalent of Gen 1 Mewtwo, but that only accounts for roughly 4 years of its now 22-year-long lifespan. Being able to Mega Evolve while not having to abandon an item slot is impressive for sure, but Mega Rayquaza still faces competition from the likes of Mega Mewtwo Y and Deoxys attack form even in singles. Maybe if Megas hadn't been mostly abandoned after Gen 7, Mega Rayquaza could still have a case for the strongest legendary of all time, but seeing as how they're unlikely to become permanent again, heck, for all we know Rayquaza may not even make it into Legends ZA, I can't in good faith rank it as the best. Alright, so of the Pokemon left, Landorus certainly sticks out like a sore thumb, doesn't he? Yes, Landorus doesn't have the gargantuan stats or tier to himself as Mewtwo or Rayquaza did, but he does offer one thing that never goes out of style: utility. Regardless of whether it's Incarnate form or Therian form, Landorus has a kit that makes nearly any Pokemon jealous, allowing it to fulfill nearly any role imaginable. But as I alluded to earlier, both forms of Landorus have taken a bit of a step back in recent gens. The existence of Incineroar took away a lot of Landorus Therian's market share in VGC, just like Incineroar did to a lot of VGC Pokemon. Rapid Strike Urshifu, who is currently legal, is another bane of Landorus, as Surging Strike's ability to always crit negates any Intimidate drops that Landorus dishes out. Now, Landorus did win the 2023 World Championships, which is certainly an impressive feat, but that more than likely is just because Incineroar wasn't legal yet. Landorus has a mightily impressive resume, but I just feel like it lacks the domination factor that some of these other legends have. Now we arrive at who I believe is the first true contender for greatest legendary of all time, Xerneas. Even in a metagame filled with threats like Primal Groudon, Primal Kyogre, Mega Rayquaza, and all the Tapus and Ultra Beasts, Xerneas never flinched against any of them. For 2 straight generations, this Pokemon was everywhere, which is honestly why it's kinda surprising that Xerneas has never won a Masters World Championships. Power Herb GMC effectively lets this Pokemon double its special attack, special defense, and speed all in one turn. And with Fairy Aura granting an additional 50% power boost to Moonblast and Dazzling Gleam, there are very few Pokemon in singles or VGC who can comfortably stand against it. Well, aside from one. Xerneas' Bane would be introduced in Generation 8 in the form of Zacian. With higher speed than Xerneas, being a physical attacker and having a favorable type matchup, not even Dynamax could save Xerneas from being utterly destroyed by Zacian. Probably because they also accounted for that by making Behemoth Blade hit twice as hard against Dynamax Pokemon. Ah, how fun. Zacian also arguably has the best possible type combination in the game, Fairy Steel. This combo leaves it weak to only ground and fire, allows it to resist half the type chart, and between Play Rough, Behemoth Blade, and Close Combat, it can hit 8 types for super effective damage. Additionally, with a base stat total of 720, or, well, now 700 now that it's been nerfed, Zacian is tied with Black Kyurem and White Kyurem for the highest stats among all non-Mega Evolutions or other temporary transformations, excluding Arceus. Zamazenta is also up there with it, but unfortunately, Zamazenta sucks. And unlike Rayquaza, Terrapagos, or Necrozma, it seems highly unlikely that Game Freak would ever remove Zacian's crown form from the game. The best they can do is try their best to nerf it, which they did in Gen 9 with both its stats and ability, but despite that, Zacian is still among the most commonly used legendaries in the Ubers tier. And although it has not yet been legalized in Gen 9 VGC, whenever that comes to pass, I can only assume that Zacian's Reign of Terror will pick up right where it left off. The only Pokemon I can realistically see giving Zacian a run for its money this generation is Koraidon, who is also not legalized as of making this video. Honestly, the only point against Koraidon so far is its lack of history. Remember my earlier comment about not having any rings? Well, it might be safe to assume that Koraidon will have some eventually. Seeing as how its ability is basically Zacian's and Groudon's put together, arguably 2 of the best abilities in VGC history that aren't Intimidate, I should say, I have no doubt that this thing will run the tables. In singles right now, between Swords Dance and Loaded Dice Scale Shot, it can obliterate nearly any wall standing in its way. And as mentioned earlier, Koraidon's ability lets it be an amazing team player for other past Paradox Pokemon, which are already powerful enough as is. In fact, Koraidon's ability to be a team player may be what ultimately elevates this Pokemon above Zacian in the long run. For now, it's all hypothetical, but look out, because I believe Koraidon will most likely become one of the strongest competitive Pokemon for many, many generations to come. If we're going on history though, Zacian and Xerneas are both up there, and oddly they sort of form a triangle of strengths and weaknesses around each other. But comparing head to head is mostly pointless. After all, this is Pokemon, a game where a level 1 Rattata can KO a level 100 Arceus with the right moves and strategy. Because of that, it's incredibly hard to crown one Pokemon over nearly 30 years as the definitive greatest. But I can say with some degree of confidence, it's likely one of these 3. But if you're considering peaks, then it's probably Gen 1 Mewtwo or Gen 6 Mega Rayquaza. See, there's a lot of different ways that you can slice this. So who is the best definitively? Well, you have all the info now, so that's for you to decide. But don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and I'll see you guys next time.